Hello everyone and welcome back to the Superbet Chess Classic, currently being played in Romania, 10 players single round robin tournament. It's Alireza, Firouzja versus Fabiano, Caruana. We said that we will cover one more game from round 3 and then we're gonna check out the standings and see what's what. It's a really complicated game. You guys will really have to struggle to follow this one. Sorry about that, but these guys are just amazing players and most of the positions that we could make a pause the video moment are just studies that even the players could not figure out over the board. So if I covered all of them, the video would take like 45 minutes. As usual, I decided to show you the best of the best. So let's check it out. Alireza with white opens with pawn to d4. We have pawn to d5 by Fabi. Knight f3, we have knight to f6 and c4. We have pawn to e6, so a standard queen's gambit declined. Knight to c3 and knight b to d7. This is the barman variation of the three knights. C captures on d5, we have e captures and bishop to g5. We have pawn to c6, strengthening the d5 pawn as the knight is now pinned, and queen to c2. We have bishop to e7, pawn to e3, and now knight to h5. So all been played before, nothing new here. Bishop captures, queen captures, and we reach a position where a move is played that was never played before. Or maybe it has been played, but no, I don't think it was actually ever played. I will check, but I think it's a first, because here everyone castles queenside. Or they play bishop to e2 or bishop to d3, and then they castle kingside. But not Alireza. Alireza played pawn to g4. He dislodges the knight, and he says, all right, the other territory with castles and the developing of the bishop and then castling kingside, that's all been covered. There are hundreds of games in the database from top-tier tournaments and players. But g4, that is definitely something else. And okay, Fabi says, all right, you have the white pieces. Obviously, we want to play for a win. Knight h to f6. We have rook to g1 and knight to b6. And Alireza, I think it's because he already had such a nice start to the tournament. He has a win and a loss, a win and a draw. Fabi with two draws, with a win with white against Fabi, Alireza could really cement his lead. So pawn to h3. We have bishop to e6 and bishop to d3. We have pawn to g6 and both players now castle queenside. So castles, and king to b1. Maybe the idea was, okay, maybe Fabi castles kingside and then we have some sort of a crazy game with castles on opposite sides. But no, both of them castle queenside. We have king b1, king to b8, and king to a1. Fabi says, all right, king to a8 is a little bit unnecessary. You have a light square bishop, so, my king is perfectly fine on a dark square. Rook to c8. Fabi says, I'm probably going to play rook c7, rook c8, and then strike with pawn to c5. Or, if the position allows it, just pawn to c5 could be fine. We have rook to c1, rook to c7 preparing to double up, and knight to d2. Now, preparing to advance the f-pawn, but also shifting the knight to b3, maybe to c5, maybe to a5, and so on. We have pawn to h5, and keeping the position closed on the king side. g5, knight f to d7, and pawn to h4. Pawn to h4, we have pawn to c5. And this is what I said. You could play rook h to f8, rook h to c8, double up first, and then play pawn to c5. Fabi says there is no need. C5 right away. And Alireza just goes d captures on c5. It's interesting if the pawn should be captured or not, because c4 doesn't seem to be a threat ever. If black plays this, then there's no captures on d4 anymore, and it's gonna be a close position, and then it will be white who will be looking for a breakthrough with something like f3 and d4. But okay, d captures on c5, Alireza captures right away, knight captures, and knight to b5 now, attacking the rook. Rook back to c8, now also defends the rook, so if queen to c3 happens, the rook will be nicely defended. Queen to c3 and bishop to d7, offering a trade of bishop for knight. Queen to a3, basically forcing it as knight. Now the a7 pawn is hanging. You could play pawn to a6, but also there's something else in the position. Captures, and just rook to c7. so no need to further advance the pawns in front of the king. We have rook to c2, and now Fabi finally doubles up on the c file. So does Alireza, rook g to c1, and now a nice knight to e4. And look at this, the knights can be traded off, the rooks can be traded off, the queens can be traded off. So this is an invitation to an endgame. Alireza accepts. We have rook captures, queen captures, rook captures on e7, knight captures on e4, and now rook captures on e4. With the option of d4 later on. D captures could also be played, but now you have the option of d4, and also it comes with tempo. Because everything we know about the endgame tells us that Alireza should be better here. It's equal material, but he has a bishop versus a knight. There's play on both sides of the board, so obviously a bishop should be a little bit better. All of these pawns are on light square, so they should be easy targets for the bishop. The problem is the undefended h4 pawn. Now Alireza has to waste a move, rook to h1, get his rook a little bit of to a passive position, and now Fabi strikes with pawn to d4, further unleashing his rook's potential. Bishop to d3 and rook to g4. And here, what do you play? It's very, very hard to actually find a move. Fabi's threat is very simple. He wants to capture on e3 and play rook g3. That's it. And then he's going to capture another pawn. He's going to be up a pawn. And there doesn't seem to be a good way to stop this, and I will just show you what the engine plays. And no, it's not e4. e4 is not a great move. The engine would just give up a pawn with king b1. And then after d captures on e3, f captures on e3, and the rook to g3, king to c2. Okay, we give up a pawn. Rook captures, king to c3, and after king to c8, king to d4. And yes, you're down a pawn, but you got your king all the way from a1 to d4. And that is a lot of activity, and it is enough to counter the, being down a pawn. So after rook to g4, bishop to c2 was played by Alireza for the lack of a better move. Plus, he's also very, very low on time. You have to reach move 40 to be granted additional time. So he's playing on increment here, basically played this move with 2 seconds on the clock. We have rook to g2 by Fabi. E captures on d4, rook captures on f2, and now king to b1. Of course, Alireza knows that he has to get his king into the game. Knight c2, knight c4 now preventing the bishop from moving, as the b2 pawn would hang as well. But there is bishop to d3. Now you cannot capture with the rook, as the knight would hang, and if knight captures on b2, which can be played after bishop to b5, the knight is in a bit of a difficult spot, because now the knight cannot move, and after a6 you have this rook to f1 move, either forcing a rook trade, or you move the bishop and then you go after the f7 pawn, basically winning the f file. So after bishop d3, knight to d6 by Fabi, we have rook to f1 offering a rook trade, and rook to d2 attacking the bishop, rook to f3 defending, and now rook to g2 going for rook to g4 to attack both the h pawn and the d pawn, b3 and pawn to b5. The knight nicely defending the f7 pawn, so you don't have to worry. And the b5 stops bishop to c4 to put more pressure on the f7 pawn. So pawn to a4, and here we have b captures on a4, which is very interesting, as it was played to sort of keep an eye on the c4 square. a6 does seem like a move that should be played. But okay, Fabi plays b captures on a4. He was also very low on time. h6, a6, the engine says is the only winning move. But Fabi played b captures on a4, and now the point is that Alireza misplayed it. He played bishop to c4. Which seems like a good idea, because the pawn is no longer on b5. The key here is rook to f6, believe it or not. And then after king to c7, now you play bishop to c4, and now it's very, very much different. Black, the best way to play is a3, but you don't mind. Let's say king to a1, and after rook to h2 going after the pawn, now you will capture bishop captures, and after rook captures, you'll play bishop captures, and this is enough for you to get a draw. But after bishop captures, bishop to c4 was played, and now Fabi has a beautiful move here, but it's not easy to spot. Especially with a little time on the clock. The move 40 has just been reached, time control has been reached, but how do you continue here? Fab, just for fun, what would you play here? Have a few seconds, what would you play here to win the game? It's only that move that wins, nothing else. So the move that wins is rook to h2, believe it or not, and for a very specific reason. After rook to f4, defending the pawn, you will now play a5. You cannot capture on a4 as the bishop on c4 is hanging, and the white is in sort of a zugzwang. There's not much that you can do here. You have to guard the pawn. If you, well, you cannot go here, you cannot go here. Basically, the rook cannot move. What can you do? You can play something like king a1, then a3. Let's say you capture on f7. You're just going to play knight b5. And now look at this. Knight c3 followed by rook to a2. Checkmate is coming. So rook to f3, you have to stop knight to c3, and now knight captures on d4. Rook c3, rook to b2, and there is no defense against knight to c2 check. This will win the rook, and that is it. Bishop captures. Now, okay, you stop knight c2, but now you allow knight to b3 check. Captures, and yes, you will have two connected pass pawns and the bishop versus the rook. Looks scary, but there's rook b4. You're going to lose the h pawn, and then it's not scary. Then it's just straight out winning for black. So rook h2 was incredibly powerful here. Fabi plays a captures on b3. And okay, it's definitely a miss. He missed a win there, but he reached time control. Both of them now have sufficient time. And okay, bishop captures on b3. We have knight to f5, rook to h3, defending the pawn, and rook to f2, preparing rook f4 to go after the pawn once again. And now, okay, you start gobbling up the light square pawns. Bishop captures, we have knight captures on h4. Going after the bishop if rook captures knight on h4. So rook to b3. With check, we have king to c7, and now rook to a3. Going after the a7 pawn, we have pawn to a5, and the bishop to d5. We have rook to f5, now attacking the bishop and the pawn. Not a lot of good moves for Alireza here. We have rook to c3 with check, king to d6, and now bishop to e4. Attacking the rook, but now rook captures on g5. Rook to c6 with check, king to d7, and now rook to a6, going after the a5 pawn. Rook to g4, going after the bishop to c2, and now king to e7. Here, believe it or not, king to e7 is the only winning move for Fabi. If Fabi plays knight f5, which is a move you really want to play, look at this. Rook captures on g6, and all of a sudden, no more win for Fabi, because after captures, it's captures with check. Rook e6 doesn't help you. It's even worse. It would lose the game due to e6, so you're just going to have to give up the rook as it is to capture this pawn. And after captures king d5, captures, it will be a draw by insufficient material once the pawn is captured, or it's going to be a stalemate or whatever. So after bishop to c2, king to e7 was played, only winning move for Fabi. Rook captures on a5, king to f6, and now rook to a6 with check, king g5, and pawn to d5. Alireza has a passed pawn, and he starts pushing it, and not easy for Fabi to move that knight, otherwise rook captures on g6 will happen. So knight to f5. Now it can be played as the king also guards the pawn. We have king to b2, and now pawn to h4. Rook to d4 was much better. Now with pawn to h4, it's again a drawish position. We have king to c3, pawn to h3, pawn to d6, pawn to h2, pawn to d7, and now rook to d4, preventing the pawn from being queened, but now bishop captures on f5. We have h1 queen, king captures on d4, and now queen to h8 with check. We have king to d5 and king captures on f5. We have rook to d6 now, and Alireza says good luck winning this, even though you have a queen versus my rook. Fabi blocks with queen to d8, and now king to c6. And here, look at this, pawn to g5, which is by far the best move Fabi can play. But now it's not easy for Alireza. There's only one move that allows him to draw the game, and I mean, chess is sometimes funny like that, but try and find this idea. So the only move that saves the game for Alireza is rook to d3. Alireza almost played it. He played rook to d1, which is, you know, close but not quite. I will show why. Because after rook to d3, after black starts pushing, you play rook e3, and you're preparing rook to e8, but also you're covering the g3 square. And now after king to f4, rook to e8, let's say queen to f6 with check, king to c7, this is easily drawn. Pawn to g3, d8, you will get a queen into the game, and after the king captures rook, captures pawn to g2, just rook to g8, and you will give up the rook for a pawn, and that's it. Very nicely drawn. However, after g5, Alireza played rook to d1, and here it's a little bit different. Now pawn to g4, Alireza also plays rook e1. Seems like it's the exact same idea, but now Fabi finds some unpleasant checks. Queen to a8 with check, king to d6, and now pawn to g3. And the question is, why isn't rook to e8 enough now? Well, if you play rook to e8 now, then again, after a couple of checks, queen a3, king to c6, queen to a4 check, king to c7, and queen to c4 check, it doesn't matter where you go. King to d6, just pawn to g2, and you're covering g8, so rook g8 is not an option. And if d8 queen, you just give a nice check, you trade queens, captures, and you promote your pawn to a queen. That is a difference. It's, it's small difference, but a huge difference. So king to e7 was played, now trying to queen this way, but it doesn't work. Queen to a3 with check, we have king to e8, queen to a4, stopping the pawn from advancing. We have rook to f1 with check, king to e6, now threatening captures and checkmate if the rook moves from the f-file. So rook e1, it can move with check though. We have king to f5, rook to e2, stopping g2, but now queen b5 attacks the rook, still prevents the pawn from moving forward. We have rook to e7, and here Fabi just played pawn to g2, and he was in this position on move 73 that Alireza Firouzja resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once you play anything here, doesn't really matter what will you play. Rook g7, you're gonna stop the pawn. King to f6, and what can you do? If king to f8, then just queen to b8 check, you stop, and then, okay, this is checkmate. Or after king f6, you could capture the pawn, that's also possible, but it's still gonna be a checkmate. Queen to e5 check. Now if king to d8, queen to b8 is mate in 1, and if king to f8, then again queen to b8 check, only now it's mate in 2. We can promote to a knight just for fun, and then captures will again be checkmate. So yeah, very, very bold play by Alireza. He wanted the game. He wanted the unexplored territory. It was, happened very, very early on here after this standard position. Like we said, he tried with pawn to g4. It was a valiant attempt, a very good idea. If you want to, play for more than a draw, because probably Fabi knows all of this, by heart. So g4, definitely a nice idea. The one thing that I found most impressive about Alireza's pawn to g4 move is that it doesn't seem to be something that he prepared at home or, before he came to the game. Because look at the situation on the clock. Alireza playing instantly, Fabi burning his time. And then g4, the first move where Alireza actually spends time. He spent 8 minutes on this move. And you don't blitz out all of the moves and then spend 8 minutes on a move you prepared at home. You want to, serve it to your opponent and, just look him in the eye and say, yes, I prepared this, good luck, finding your way out of the forest. But no, Alireza is that kind of a player. He just, had a good idea over the board, played it against Fabiano Caruana, didn't work out, but, it could have. So, also, we said that we will check out the standings after 3 rounds have been played. So these are the standings. Fabi and Prague leading with 2 points. With 1.5 points, we have 6 people. Wesley So, Maxim Vashelagrav, Jan Krzysztof Duda, Bogdan Daniel Deak, Alireza Firouzja, and Gukesh Domaraju with 1 point, Levon Aronyan, and Nodirbek Abdusatov. So this is obviously a super tournament. It's very weird seeing Nodirbek and Levon in last place with 1 point, but in a super tournament, there is always a super grandmaster who is last. That's just how super tournaments work. So, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank E1 Check, Only Bullet, Random Pawn, Douglas Van Bathuizen, and Samuel Kamuli for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.